Good day. My name is Andrew Molchany. I'm thrilled to be hosting this keynote conversation today for our online demo week, and even more excited to be connected with our guest, Nilima Achwal. Nilima is the founder of the Female Founders Lab, a virtual global support and capital ecosystem for venture ideas that will create a new paradigm for their industries and humanity. Nilima's approach is one that is regenerative, holistic, sustainable, democratic, and just. Super excited to dive into this conversation. Nilima, welcome. Please tell us a little bit about your background, what inspired you to start the Female Founders Lab, and what kind of work you're doing.
Sure. It's so great to be here, Andrew. And something that I do at the beginning of every single conversation that I have is to have a grounding breath. And this is especially effective across virtual audiences. So I invite everyone at the same time to just take a nice deep breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. Well, thank you for having me. My name is Nilima Achwal, and I have been in the social entrepreneurship space for my entire career. And I've pretty much seen every single side of it. So I was a professional business case writer at the University of Michigan. So I was writing MBA curriculum on social impact and emerging markets. I've run a seed stage accelerator in India that working with innovators from every single industry, helping them raise their first round of capital. And we had a 75% success rate in them raising that money, and later raised funding from the Rockefeller Foundation for that program. And then I eventually became a founder myself. And I founded a social venture in India called Iesha Learning, which was trying to break 3,000 years of deep taboos on sexuality and gender. And I scaled that out to 500,000 kids across the country. In my founder journey, I went through so many accelerators myself, a lot of, just all of the big name mainstream tech accelerators. I was on a reality show, like Shark Tank style, pitching to 10 million people across the country, and just went through all of the startup ecosystem stuff. And realized, really felt in my heart that there was a gap for purpose-driven and impact-driven founders. People with visions to really transform industries and to transform systems. So in my journey, I had a small team. I had a team of 3 or 4 people. I had done a friends and family round. But, in 3 years, we reached a scale with my sex education product that has not been reached by any NGOs or even governments in terms of how high touch and paradigm shifting it is and the scale that it reached. And I realized startups, founders really are coming through with really big visions to solve the underlying pressing challenges for humanity. And the startup system was never set up to support these kind of founders. And so I created the Female Founders Lab as a very holistic, high-touch approach for those founders who have those very big visions, and supporting them in the pre-seed and seed stage to really crystallize that vision and anchor into it, and not get as influenced by the noise in the ecosystem, and set their own terms in terms of how much capital they want to bring in, what sort of capital, and really be able to be foundationally strong to go out and create that impact in the world.
That's wonderful. That kind of empowerment, I think, is really aligned with the kind of impact and work that Newchip is striving for. Let's dig a little bit deeper on this. So you believe that startups are the most powerful tool we have to create this shift in global consciousness. Tell us more about that. What does that mean for you? How does that perspective guide the work that you're doing, thinking about consciousness and the role that startups play in making that shift?
Yeah. So first of all, the idea of venture capital, venture-backed startups, is fairly recent. And so venture capital firms didn't become a huge thing until like the 80s. And then there was the tech, all the tech stuff that happened in the 90s. So we're looking at a very young and very nascent industry, so to speak, to begin with, which is startup and venture capital. This started in Silicon Valley in San Francisco, and you just had like a certain very small percentage of people who were able to be exposed to that world and innovate in this very exciting space. Now you're seeing this massive democratization, and as at Newchip, you see there's founders, there's entrepreneurs, there's like brilliant minds from every country and all over America as well, of every like race, gender, age, and lived experience. So what happens when this democratization of capital and of information and just startup culture takes place is that the founders who are now stepping up with their visions are the ones who have the actual lived experience of the deepest pain points and the biggest gaps that we face in our most important industries. So healthcare. The healthcare system is broken. I mean, millions and millions of people are suffering in like overdependence on medication and not being able to heal from chronic illnesses and diseases. Education system was built during the Industrial Revolution and is like based on rote learning and like just does not prepare kids for the future of work, which is already changing so rapidly. Food systems. I mean, I can go into the like over-industrialization of the food system, food deserts, all the issues there, like media, like so many, like we have all of these challenges. And I do feel like startups, as powerful as they are in terms of being able to raise capital really quickly and grow and scale and influence culture. I mean, the companies that influence our culture the most globally all started out as startups, right? But they still, so far, the sorts of innovations that are getting funded have a fairly narrow focus. But the founders that are coming up now are actually starting to solve some of these deeper challenges. And I don't think that venture capital and the accelerator ecosystem has kept up with the caliber of the founders that are now stepping up to the plate.
I think we certainly see that dynamic here at Newchip, where we have founders. You mentioned lived experience. We have founders in our most recent cohorts representing 20 and 22 different countries around the world. And certainly their lived experience is not only unique to the local community or regional context from which they grew up and have operated and are growing their startup, but also similarly to what you mentioned, it's really shaping the way that they've established a value system personally and for their organization. I think that that's really coming through in the quality of engagement that we're seeing from those founders. I want to focus a little bit more on some of these sort of key pillars of your approach. You mentioned the democratization and this very front and center element of justice being associated with kind of how venture capital and the startup ecosystem is growing. But there's also these pieces of a holistic approach, a sustainable approach, being regenerative. How did you really arrive at those focal points? What does that say about the status quo of the startup ecosystem currently, if those were the areas that you felt really needed more attention?
Yeah. So I think this is a critique not just of the startup ecosystem, but even of the social enterprise ecosystem, which was modeled off of the startup ecosystem, but with impact investing so that you're getting returns on impact as well as financial returns, which is that we're still expecting, a lot of times we're still expecting it's just like, what is the thing? Oh, it's an app. What is the thing? Oh, it's a hardware product. It's a VR product. It's AI, right? And I think that a lot of times when we're like, what is the thing? We're eclipsing so many layers of where this venture idea came from, the entrepreneur's motivation and like why behind it, and their driving force, their personal story, which is actually going to be the fuel, the jet fuel that allows them to grow at quantum speed. So when a founder comes into my accelerator, they usually have a really big vision. They're like, I want to solve unemployment for millions of women across the African continent. I want to solve chronic illness for mental health in America. Like, I want to solve food systems. Like, they come in with these visions, and right away I can see the toll that the ecosystem has taken on them, and that they're trying to, in 1 minute, explain their app. And I'm like, I see you. I see that your vision is so much bigger than this. Like, breathe, take your time, tell me your story. And when I open that space for that larger vision to come through, and I say, I see you, and I believe you, and I think you can do this, that's when we start to play. That's when that's when the energy opens. And it's like, oh yeah, it wasn't just about like pitching this like app and trying to get like some capital. It's really about this bigger journey. And what happens then is that results happen faster. Because you're like, okay, if I'm trying to reach him, like, if this is really the core of this, then somehow when you open it up, you start to quantum leap into those bigger outcomes faster.
It sounds like that approach is really focused on breaking down some of those initial barriers that founders themselves experience so that they can be their authentic selves. Am I understanding you correctly in that way, that you're wanting founders to really be not just comfortable, but to be able to be authentic and to sort of leverage their own insights, their own innovative ideas, because you are creating that context with them?
Right. And it's actually, I push them. It's the bravery to fully see what it is that wants to be birthed through you. I believe that your vision chooses you. And when we come from that perspective, there's nothing you can't do. But it is important that you fully crystallize the fullness of your vision, and you're like, wow, I can embody that. Like, I can be a vessel for that. That can be me. So strengthening yourself as a container, as a vessel for that vision. And I think to fully answer your question from before, like regenerative, sustainable, holistic, democratic, and just, these are not just principles, right? So the visions coming through these founders, they really are pushing us towards a paradigm, which is a multi-stakeholder capitalism, which is an inclusive capitalism, where we're fundamentally restructuring the way that some of these industries work. If you told just any human being, like any individual, like if you went up to them and you're like, it's your job to restructure how the healthcare system works, they're gonna be like, no way, like that's crazy. How can I do that, right? But saying up front, like, this is what's needed for us to move forward on our planet, like in our countries, like for humanity to like flourish, because we're pretty much at a breaking point in all of our industries. This is what is needed. And putting that out front, I think almost gives permission for founders to be like, well, actually, yeah, that is what I wanted to do in the first place, but I just thought it was too big, One
of the ways that you characterize your approach is through what you call goddess leadership. Tell our audience more about that and sort of how that process begins for transformation for the clients that you work with.
Sure. So I love that you use the word transformation. I truly believe that whatever we can magnetize into our venture is a direct reflection of our own sense of self, our own identity. And so a lot of the work that I do with founders is in stepping into like who they are, like what their vision truly is, like who they already are, but also like their own self-perception, their own self-identity. And it's kind of, so goddess leadership is a mix of the two. It's the inner, it's like I am, like this vision shows me, it's coming through me, like, yeah, I surrender to that, but it's also but I also have to choose my identity. I have to choose to like take the actions. Like I have to choose to raise that larger round of capital. I have to choose to be the CEO. So I always call it as a mix of like feminine and masculine energies, and balancing the two in us. So I always say feminine is about being a vessel for the vision to come through you. And the masculine is about like the doing, like the claiming, like the choosing. And I think that like for women founders particularly, there's like, there needs to be permission to just like relax into the vision chose me, but then there also needs to be the permission to like claim the like, and I'm the CEO and I get to take the actions and do it too.
Yeah, I mean that I hear that as both a combination of empowerment, but then also use the word permission, not because you're granting it, right, but because founders are acknowledging it independently, right, independent of the system, independent of someone else who has to validate their idea, but sort of that self permission, right, to be to sort of take on that leadership approach, that strategic approach, and balancing the two. I think that is really powerful, and it's something that would speak to a lot of founders, sort of regardless of their background. Let's pursue that piece a little bit more, because in some sense, there's a little bit of a paradox, right, in terms of focusing on the individual founder, and then also wanting to work towards systemic change. But based on what you've described and how you've described it, it makes a lot of sense that you are coaching founders to sort of start with the personal, to start with that kind of understanding, self-awareness, to then be able to more successfully approach systemic change. Is that in line with sort of what your vision is and how you work?
Yeah, you nailed it, Andrew. So the change that we seek as change makers, so all the founders I work with are systems change makers, but you can't just go out and create change. But if you change from the inside first, we immediately see it reflected out at us. And first we see it in our micro cocoon. It's like, oh, wow, people are reaching out to me. People want to invest in my company. But then as the ventures start to grow, then we see it reflected more broadly. So now, you have more leverage, you have more influence, you have more visibility, and you can actually start to create those changes systemically. And I do think that, so systemic change, it's like when enough people are turned on at the heart level like this, when they're turned on with their intuition, when they're operating from this place, and all those people come together, and all of the different visions, which are aligned towards the broader vision of transforming the industry, come together, is when the true systemic change will happen.
So something we have in common is we've written social innovation curriculum. I've done this for middle and high school students as part of a Washington, D.C. based organization that was teaching social innovation to students. You've done this at the graduate level. Why, and I think this connects very much to the systemic approach, why is it so critical in your experience that there are curricula that are created intentionally for young people to develop this kind of skill building and understanding? Why is that an important part of this puzzle?
Honestly, it's so crazy, but historically, I mean, for hundreds of years, we've literally divorced the mind and the heart. We're like, okay, this is work. And for so many years, it was like men in suits, like going into work, like being it's like this very rigid paradigm of like, what is work? What is industry? And then at some point it all started to break, and people started being like, wow, we have a lot of problems, and like all of the ways that we're doing business creating issues. Okay, sounds like we need impact. So then there's the NGOs, right? NGOs creating very small localized impact on the ground. Like not, some NGOs are large, but it's like segregating, right? And so social entrepreneurship was trying to merge the two and say like, no, actually our biggest problems need to be solved by through enterprise. I mean, because that's what enterprise actually exists for. And can we merge the two? And so I see social entrepreneurship curriculum in schools as an institutionalization of the merging of the mind and the heart, and almost validating that yes, it's okay for us to bring our purpose and our heart and all our full selves, as humans, as vessels for our purpose, as doing work and operating inside industries in this way. And that was the first codifying of it. That was the first way that we've institutionalized bringing our heart into our work. But I still think that social impact curriculum is, again, it is a silo as well, right? Because then it's like, okay, regular business, social enterprise. And I think the next wave really is going to be that it is going to be systemic change. It's going to be like basically a radical transformation of all of our industries, and it's not going to be called social impact anymore.
One of the experiences I had many times, working with young people and talking about business and entrepreneurship and social innovation in that sense, is young people had this perspective of, well, I'm a teenager, I can't really make a big difference, right? Or I can't have a huge impact yet. I have to achieve something. They weren't exactly sure what, but it included being older and maybe more experienced, or having been a part of some other system. And often what we had to reinforce and focus on was this sort of shifting of reality and focus to say, no, the impact that you can have now not only is really real and legitimate, but can be much greater than you have any idea that you could have. And that was inspiring, right? To see young people own that, not just opportunity, but responsibility to sort of have that impact and to do that kind of work. You mentioned this at the beginning of our call, but I want you to share with our audience more about the sex education program that you launched in India. I think I read that you have worked with over 500,000 students. That number may be more now, but just tell us about that experience and what that has been like, what that has meant, how you learn from that process, and how that's related to the work you're continuing to do now.
Sure. So when I was in India running the seed stage accelerator there, so in 2013, there was a highly publicized rape case that happened in Delhi. And it was basically like, and we've seen these moments in the US as well, like the Me Too movement, or even like the guns, like rights, anti-gun movement, where all the kids stepped out of schools. But basically there was an outpouring. It was like you had taken the cap off of something which had been repressed for a really long time. And you just saw this outpouring of people coming out on the streets and protesting, and grief and trauma, like all coming to the surface after, in a society where you really don't talk about sex. And so what happens when there's this like collective watershed moment in any, whether it's on sexual violence or anything else, is that, all the system will respond. And so in terms of the government side, they were trying to come up with better legislation to punish rapists. And the startup ecosystem did what it does. And a lot of young engineers started to come up with safety apps. And so you see this proliferation of like panic buttons and safety apps. And there's even one innovation that like won this award, which was an electric bra, which is like if someone tried to molest like the woman, it would give off electric shocks, which is like, it's like kind of ridiculous. It's like, this is not actually a systemic solution to gender inequality, to like sexual trauma and all of these things that are actually coming to the surface. But I think it just really goes to show overall, like, this is what our systems do. They always do this, whatever it is, they react with a Band-Aid solution. And I really wanted to come up with something I always try to get to the root of the thing, because I'm like, if I can solve it at the root once, if I can create a transformation for one classroom or for one student, I know that this can solve the problem at scale. Like, that's just the way it works. My job is to figure out how to create that transformation. So I started my hypothesis, every entrepreneur starts with a hypothesis. I'm like, if I can break the taboo on sex and gender with middle schoolers, it's not gonna go into the black box and then like percolate into deeper problems in the future. Started going into middle school, started running sex ed curriculum, and literally seeing the most like harassing, bullying, toxic classrooms turn into the most respectful, empathetic, like 8th grade classroom, like in the entire school, in a matter of weeks. And going into the school like a few months later, and all the teachers like stood up and gave us a standing ovation. And they're like, what did you do with our kids? Like, you took our most misbehaved kids and turned them into the most respectful kids in school. And we're like, we broke the taboo. We gave them a forum to learn about these topics in a taboo-free, like accurate, positive way. And now those kids are spreading the right information with their peers. And I had boys coming to me like, I'm teaching all the other boys about consent. And like, we never knew about all of this. And like, thank you for teaching us. And so just watching the kids' hearts open, and then in turn, like the ripple effect that creates in the school and in the community. And so I had this product, I'd run these pilots, I'm like, this is fantastic, right? I'm like, I got it, I have the silver bullet, we can solve gender inequality. And of course, that's not the way that social change happens. These problems are here for a reason. So I go out, start pitching to schools, to like large education technology companies, all over the place. And the level of education that I had to do for the customer was crazy. Like, people just had the most, like, people didn't understand what sex education was, why it was important. People were scared to incorporate because they're scared what the parents will think, all of the things. And realizing that, like, the mastering the skill of winning hearts and minds that's the number one skill I think that any human can have. And as a founder, I think it becomes so important because and that's what eventually allowed me to create a partnership with the largest corporation in India, which is Tata. And having their facilitators actually like training teachers in every single city across the country now and reaching 600,000 students nationally with the paradigm shifting curriculum. So needless to say, it was a very hard journey, but like at the end, it, like really, like I just felt like all along I was trusting my heart. I'm like, this has to come through me. I was like, that restlessness you feel as a founder. And it's like, no matter if everyone thinks I'm insane, like, you just keep doing it and nothing so the way that things happen, nothing happens. And then suddenly it happens, right? So like to all the founders, like I just want to say that it's like that is like the way it happens. It's like it comes in spurts. So like keep going with the vision, if it's calling you.
Well, and that self-belief is contagious, right? I mean, we have both experienced this, working with young people, and I can especially relate to the anecdote of, transforming a classroom from the most challenging to one of the most engaged and most respectful. That has to begin with a modeling of those behaviors, right? And teaching vocabulary, teaching ways in which to speak about and to talk about and to connect with others about really important topics. That has to be done explicitly, right? It doesn't all happen through just hoping that young people develop the skills and that perspective. And so I think what you shared, from the founder perspective is just equally powerful, because whether that's educating a customer about what your product or service does or can do, why that's important, what the inspiration and sort of background is there, that's incredibly relevant. I think regardless of industry, for sure. In your experience and with the founders with whom you work, what are the biggest challenges facing women founders today? What's helping and what's harming the work that women founders are currently doing, either from an industry or sort of customer focused perspective, or from an investment perspective?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So there's a lot of in the ecosystem. It's everyone hears like 3% of venture capital goes to women. It's so hard for women to raise capital and all of those things. But I'm not going to focus on that right now. I truly believe that if you have a vision coming through you that you're birthing, the money is there for it. Like, I just believe in that fundamentally as like a metaphysical concept, and the fact that there's a lot of capital opening up for female founders. Not to say that, of course, the systemic prejudices, biases, all those things exist. And also we have the power to create whatever we want. And so I kind of come from that dual, like being able to hold the duality of those two things. So not feeling because if you go in already feeling, you can't go in feeling defeated, right? You have to go in like in your full power, and like, and that's how my founders actually magnetize all the capital to them, is like remembering that they have the power to magnetize whatever they need and service to their vision. And to answer your question, like more tactically, I think some of the things that really so there's that, and then there's the fact that we operate in ways that we like have seen modeled before. And so if you've been working at a corporation for a long time, all you know is like corporate organizational structure, corporate work ethic, 9 to 5, and like, things like that. If all you know is like going to school, like getting good grades and having always someone to give you like a grade, right? So there's a lot of unlearning that has to happen when we become founders, but especially if we're women, because there's a lot of ways that we operate that just hasn't been modeled in leadership before. And so I talk a lot about like overworking culture. And this kind of like constant anxiety that like I need to be working more hours and like that grind. And I completely disagree with that, because I think that I don't think it matters how much time you put in. I think you can even put in a few hours if you're going in with the right intention and like that clarity and taking those exact steps you need to move your venture forward. And that's actually like contentious. Like if you tell someone like, you don't need to be working 10 hours a day, like they will, there's like, that's a trigger for a lot of people, because we've been so conditioned into thinking we have to be slaves to like the work matrix, right? And like, so with women founders especially, I mean, like the whole like feminine energy is about being a magnet. It's not about like going out and pushing and like killing yourself over it and getting unhealthy. And so I think that like when I gently like guide founders towards that, they're like, yeah, that's actually like how I work best anyway. And like, but it's like, you need the courage to try it and to believe in it. And then you start to see things shift for yourself. But yeah, a lot of that unlearning has to happen.
I think that balance that you're talking about, whether that's just literally how many hours a day or a week you're committing to something, and what else you're doing with your time, with your life, that's helpful, that's part of your priorities as a person. I think that's something that all founders, all people benefit from hearing. Certainly myself, and as a reminder to structuring calendars and commitments. It's really powerful to hear you say that. My last question is sort of around what you believe needs to happen systemically, at scale, however you want to characterize it, for the kind of future that you're envisioning and working towards to continue to take shape. What else are you wanting to see happen that can help drive the kind of perspective and approach to successful successful work as a founder? What else are you looking to see in terms of momentum in the right directions?
Absolutely. So as you said at the beginning, the Female Founders Lab is a virtual support and capital ecosystem for those leaders who are bringing forward the new paradigm for humanity and for their industries. And so the capital. And so I'd really love to launch a fund to be able to support paradigm shifting innovations led by these sort of founders all over the world. And I truly believe that we don't just need like a $5 million fund focused on systemic change. There's so little capital dedicated to industry transformation that we literally need billions of dollars dedicated towards this, because we're looking at a fundamental shift in the way that all of our industries function in every country around the world. And so, of course, starting with a smaller amount, but to answer your question in terms of what's needed, that's actually what is needed, because our governments are not going to solve these problems for us. And it is going to have to come through a space like startups and venture capital, where leaders really have the freedom to create what they want.
It's exciting and it's a huge responsibility, but it's one I'm glad you're taking on, because I agree. And I think that the impact you're having with founders directly is a fabulous place to start. It's been an absolute pleasure connecting with you today, Nilima. Thank you. Our viewers are fortunate to be able to gain, the insights you have, the perspective from your career, from the continued work that you do. I hope our audience enjoyed our keynote conversation today as much as I did, and that you're engaged with the rest of our online demo week content. Please join us for more. Like this video below, share it with your network, and thank you again for attending. Cheers, and have a great day.